2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe Libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.
All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the Actual Anarchy podcast, the podcast where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian Anarcho-Capitalist perspective. My name is Daniel, and my co-host is Robert, and tonight we're going to talk about the HBO extravaganza film Fahrenheit 451. It's based on the Ray Bradbury book of the same title, and this is episode 79 of the podcast. You can find the show notes and more at actualanarchy.com/79. Let's say hello to Robert before we get into the Last Nighters version of the show.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Last Nighters and the... Wait a minute. Is this the Last Nighters? Is that what we're doing? We're just straight up going on to the Last Nighters?
Well, not just yet. This is still the Actual Anarchy, folks. This is the cool kids.
Okay, that's what I thought. For some reason, I thought you said Last Nighters, but that's fine. Yeah, hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Glad to be here. Happy to be here. I'm pumped. I'm juiced. Ready to talk about an HBO... Did HBO buy this movie, or did they just make it? But whatever. It was, it's some sort of HBO exclusive, so there you go. Everybody can watch it.
All right, well, let's drift off into normie-friendly zone and get into the Last Nighters, and that will be lastnighters.com/22. Hey everyone, it's Daniel and Robert, the Last Nighters. Thank you for joining us once again. It's episode 22 of the show, and the show notes and more can be found at lastnighters.com/22. We're also on the iTunes and the Google Play Music, and the podcast lives at anchor.fm/lastnighters. And the show notes for this episode will be found at lastnighters.com/22. I think I'm being redundant. I think I've said that 2 or 3 times now. But we're going to talk about Fahrenheit 451 tonight, the HBO produced film that has just been released, and it is an interesting concept. It's based on a Ray Bradbury novel, and they've tried to adapt it into a film. I don't know how successful it's really turned out here, but Robert and I are going to get into it and start off with the Google description in just a moment. But how are you doing, Robert?
Oh, man, I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure to be here. I look forward to having an interesting discussion with you, sir, as we discuss this movie, film, show, entertainment.
All right. Well, thank you for being a friend and for being my guest tonight as a co-host, like you are on every show. So I appreciate you. And also, some news. The Last Nighters is part of a group of podcasters called the Libertarian Union, and a guy that we respect and follow. His show. He's Tom Woods, and he does the Tom Woods Show. He did a tweet today of our Libertarian Union group, and so we were able to get a little bit of publicity for that, so you can look for that at libertarianunion.com. We are very happy to be a part of that, and recommend if you want to find other shows that are about such topics as music, libertarianism, legal theory, and more, do check that out at libertarianunion.com.
Please do. It's a great site, great repository for all sorts of fantastic entertainment / edutainment.
Zing! All right, so let's do the Google description. Fahrenheit 451 came out May the 12th, so just a couple weeks ago on the HBO. Drama science fiction film, hour and 40 minutes, 35% Rotten Tomatoes, guaranteed not fresh. 4.9 on the IMDb, 2 out of 4 on the RogerEbert.com, though I think he's been dead for a while, so whoever's running that, 2 out of 4. And 69% of Google users like it. The description reads as thus: in a future society where books are banned and burned, a fireman begins to read in secret and discovers an underground rebellion committed to protecting literature. Directed by Ramin Barani and adapted from the novel Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Production company HBO Films. What do you think, Robert?
I like the idea that Roger Ebert's corpse is just like, meh, about this movie. That's what I like to think about it. This movie felt like a kind of a low-budget production, but it seemed, and full disclosure here, I haven't seen any previous versions of this movie, and I'm only, tangentially or peripherally aware of the story. I'm familiar with the story, but I've never actually read the book or seen any of the movies. I just know that it's about, a group of people called firefighters who go around burning books, and I think there are far more interesting details in the story, but they felt like very modern details. So I don't know how much modernization was done to the story or how timeless the original story was. But I was still entertained, but it did feel very much like not a complete movie, more like a made-for-TV kind of a movie. Almost like, like an after-school special / HBO movie, kind of somewhere in the middle. Not the greatest quality. Although Michael B. Jordan and Michael Shannon are, decent actors. Definitely not like C-list guys, but the production seemed a little on the lower side. Still decent though. I don't know. What did you think of that, Daniel?
Yeah, I kind of got that feel for it as well. Like it seemed a little bit cheesy. And Michael B. Jordan, I don't know what else he's been in that I'm familiar with, but he seemed rather wooden in this. And Michael Shannon, I just kept seeing Zod from Man of Steel, and so I kept, thinking of him as Neil before Zod and all of that. But in general, yeah, it did have kind of this, like a very small feel to it, and I think they were trying to make it have a larger feel, but they had like limited production dollars available to them or something like that. So it did feel a little bit chintzy, a little cheesy. And I think that this is also a difficult project to put onto screen, I think.
Probably. I imagine that the book didn't quite follow the script of the movie quite exactly, or vice versa. Just to reiterate your point, though, it did feel like they probably stretched the budget quite a bit. And I'm guessing that the actors and the whole crew didn't have a whole lot of time to work on this movie. Because, the actors didn't seem like they were really – there wasn't a whole lot of nuance to the performances. Like you're saying that Jordan seemed wooden. I would agree. There wasn't a whole lot of character for him to work with. There wasn't a lot of character for Shannon to work with either. He was just kind of a one-note guy. I mean, there was a little bit of emotional play there in that Shannon was, he was all about burning books, but then he also had a little bit to his character in that he wrote down like these forbidden ideas and thoughts, and then he would also, burn them, but then he also had, cared a lot about loyalty, and, I'm going to burn in hell with my brother instead of not burn in hell, I guess, or whatever he said. So there was some interesting character stuff, but it didn't seem like the actors had a lot to prepare or time to prepare, or for whatever reason, it didn't seem like a full movie. It seemed like a made-for-TV movie, the kind of movie that they'd have, like, you show up on set one day, okay, what's the script? Okay, maybe you had like 2 days to read the script, and then you're going. And then, you kind of go, okay, I got to be angry in this scene. Okay, I'll be angry. And then, okay, I'm going to be a little bit sad in this scene. Okay, I'll be sad. But it didn't seem like they really knew these characters, and these characters lived and breathed, and, it didn't feel like that. But, for what it was still okay. Yeah,
and it also seemed like this is a dystopian film, and I know Bradbury, he's not quite as at the level of, say, Orwell or Huxley, as far as like top of mind when it comes to dystopian novels, but he does carry a lot of the similar themes, right? The calling something other than what it is, and then eventually that becomes the thing that it's known for. The example being firemen, and the big deal in this is that the real history of firemen was they were putting out fires, but now they all believe that they are the ones going out using fire to destroy things that are going to subvert their uniform culture.
Which just leads me to ask the question, who does put out fires in this world? I imagine there are still fires, and they still need to be extinguished, and what do you call them? But, of course, the movie and the story, I don't think, probably, it doesn't address that.
Yeah, and these guys are essentially, like a SWAT team going around and just burning buildings down. So maybe they're actually more like the ATF and the FBI, like with the Waco stuff.
Sure. Yeah, and it made me wonder why they drove around a big fire truck? They could just, they carry around these little flamethrowers that could fit in the trunk of a Porsche. So why don't they just like drive a van or something? But I guess, the symbolic fireman truck.
Maybe it's full of kerosene,
Yeah, there you go. You got to recharge the kerosene. There you go. That makes sense.
Yeah, just in case they need a really big fire.
Got a bunch of wrong thinkers.
Yeah, so related to that, I know that the novel predates another film that we've done in the past called Equilibrium, which I like better than this film. And it has a very similar concept where you take any art, any culture, and you destroy it, and you sort of create this utopian uniformity to control people.
Right.
And I think they did a better job of it in Equilibrium, but they also had like the gun kata, the fighting going on that was a lot more interesting than I think that the story here was, where they had a fist fight in the fireman's lounge or whatever, but that was pretty much all the action.
Yeah, there was very little. They established that Michael Jordan could fight pretty well, and he does it one time, and then that's it. So not really
and
sure
usually you're setting up, early in a film, you're setting up, okay, this is foreshadowing what this character is capable of. We're going to show you something that he's going to use later, and he really never did.
Yeah, he did it one time when they raided some people's house to burn a bunch of internet computers and stuff, and he tangles with one guy in a room, and the guy has a knife, and he's defending himself, and Jordan's just yeah, come on! But then that was it. Yeah, you're right. I don't know why they needed to foreshadow that. It seems like they had more planned, and they ran out of money, probably, is what happened.
Yeah, so I'm going to channel my inner David Spade and say I liked it better the first time when it was called Equilibrium.
Yeah, I did like that about this movie, and I assume the book also, in that there was a reason for why they were doing what they were doing. And the bad guys did think of themselves as the good guys, as brainwashed and as horrifically single-minded and stupid as they were, because they didn't differentiate between ideas in their head and ideas that just happened to be written down on a piece of paper. They were still talking to media, and they were still talking to each other, so they were still trading ideas. They just didn't want to do it on a larger scale in a written form or only allowable thought. But I did like the idea that, ideas, problem ideas, you need to save yourself from bad ideas. So we need, bad ideas cause wars and problems and destruction and whatever. And it's not true. It's really dumb. But I did like the fact that they even had some sort of justification for it.
Right, and they were lauded. They were lauded as heroes, and even the news media was like, "Our firemen will defend our democracy."
Yeah,
and make everything safe. It was all about making things safe and palatable to the various interest groups, like the quote unquote victim classes who were offended by something over here, so that got banned, and then this group over here got offended by something, so now that gets banned, and you just keep going around in this vicious cycle of eventually everything's going to upset somebody. So
right.
Everything gets banned.
Yeah, if you're constantly banning things that you find offensive, then you're right. There's no end to things that people can find offensive. Because you can be offended by the truth, you can be offended by lies, you can be offended by the natural world. So there's no limit. But I wanted to ask you, Daniel, because this movie does kind of make the argument, even though it's done by the bad guys. So really the movie's making the opposite argument. But, for funsies, let's entertain the idea that these guys have a point. So there's a guy he's a very famous figure in history, unfortunately. He goes by the name of Karl Marx. And he had some ideas. He put them together with a guy named Engels, and he worked off some previous philosophers, but his ideas really kind of took hold with him. And he wrote a couple of books. And they were responsible. Of course I believe in self-ownership. So, just because an idea is presented to you, you're still responsible for your actions. So it's not to say that the Communist Manifesto then therefore, killed people. I'm not saying that, of course. I'm saying that the idea of communism generated by Marx inspired people like Stalin and Mao to then go and kill millions of people. Okay. So I just want to be clear. But would the world be better off? And of course, this is an impossible question to ask, but for funsies. Would you advocate, Daniel, that every time a copy of the Communist Manifesto was printed, let's say every time it was printed back in the day during Marx's lifetime, you bought them up and then you burned those copies, just burned them. And of course, he's going to make a good living and he'll be fine, but his ideas would never spread. Okay, so I'm not asking you if you endorse violence. You're talking about voluntary trade. You benefit because you're getting rid of these ideas off the market. He benefits by selling his ideas to you. Everybody's happy. But would you advocate doing that?
Well, no. I mean, he'd have the best customer in the world. Every book I produce, you're going to buy it and burn it. I'll just produce books all day long, every day.
You sure would.
But beyond that, no, I think that the ideas and the concepts, I mean, it's often said that there are no original ideas, and I don't believe that's necessarily true. But an idea and concept as easy to get suckered into as socialism, communism, I think would have sprung forth with Marx or without, eventually. And there were other types of socialists that predate Marx, if I recall. So, the idea that you're owed something by someone else, the idea that everyone should be forced into altruism, the idea that we should all provide for each other, but need, be compelled to do so. I don't think that those are necessarily like far-reaching ideas that wouldn't have been discovered by someone else, So I think it would have been ineffective, to say the least, and I wouldn't advocate for it. I think that the best solution for something like that is to inoculate and to debunk, take on the arguments, take on the ideas, and show where they're wrong and why they're wrong. And I'd rather, advocate for that, obviously.
Okay, so you think the bad guys in this movie are just completely wrong. You think any kind of censorship is just a fool's errand. Is that correct?
Well, that feels like a trap-type question, but yeah, we'll run with that, sure. Yeah, I think that any idea should be able to see the light of day and be considered. I mean, certainly things are offensive, and that's one of the points that Bradbury's making here, is that eventually you get your own enslavement, right? It's the people clamoring for safe spaces, right? They want to be protected and be safe and happy, and so all of these ideas that upset them and anger them are abolished and destroyed. And I think one of the comments in the film was that they went from nearly 8,000 languages in the world down to, 8? Something like that. And that reminds me of the move to go to a world language of Esperanto. And I think Bradbury's commentary and some of his quotes related is that if you can't use language and you can't write, then you can't think. And so then it's easier to be controlled. And I know that he wrote this like around the time of McCarthyism and also the concepts of consumerism being a bad thing, like the Galbraithian advertisers gonna compel you to buy something against your will because they have brainwashing techniques or something like that. So where am I running with this? I think that he's basically saying that the consumer, the masses, clamoring for safety for themselves are going to end up enslaving everyone. I think that's kind of his argument here.
Sounds like a fairly modern point he's making. I mean, it seems like something that was just as true then as it is now.
Oh, even more so. I have a quote. I mean, he died about, 5-6 years ago, and I don't know when this quote is from, but he says, "I foresaw political correctness 43 years ago, whereas back then I wrote about the tyranny of the majority. Today, I combine that with the tyranny of the minorities. These days, you have to be careful of both. They both want to control you. And I say both, bunches. Whether you're a majority or minority, bug off. To hell with anybody who wants to tell me what to write. Their society breaks down into subsections of minorities who then, in effect, burn books by banning them. All this political correctness that's rampant on campuses is BS. You can't fool around with the dangerous notion of telling a university what to teach and what not to." And the irony of his novel, Fahrenheit 451, was that it was banned in several schools and other areas. I think for two different reasons. One was because there was taking the Lord's name in vain, or the burning of the Bible. That was a problem. And then all the swear words. And there was actually a second version of the book that was highly edited, that was the censored version and was supposedly safe for schools. And then after that became the only one that was being published. And people started to compare like the old version to the new version. They were like, wait, what's going on here? Why can't I find the one with all the hells and the dams in it?
The hells and the dams. I do got to say that I did catch the vapors several times while watching this movie. I almost fainted multiple times. I'm very sensitive when it comes to bad words, Daniel. So you have to watch yourself with me. So I'm glad they got this evil book, protected themselves in the little safe spaces from these evil words.
Yeah, but that was a very good question. It was a very good question. Now I have a couple of questions for you.
Uh-oh.
So the opening of the film, and I know we're already 20 minutes into the episode here, is a Kafka quote. "It is often better to be in chains than to be free." And then it morphs into another quote from the Bill of Rights. This doesn't sound familiar to me, but it says the Bill of Rights, quote, "It is better to be happy than free." What do you think of both of these quotes?
Well, you're asking, an anarcho-capitalist, a hardcore libertarian, a self-ownership psychopath. So I'm absolutely on board. I mean, I think that there is some kind of joy you can get in servitude. There is joy you can get in servitude but I think there's a lot of people that confuse the idea of serving your fellow man, because capitalism is all about serving your fellow man, done freely. But, a communist will come along and say, well, you're clearly not free because you're being coerced into serving somebody. This is slavery.
And the point of clarification is freely, you mean of their own will, not that without money.
Yes, of your own will. Now I've been derailed, and I don't know what I was talking about. Damn it, Daniel.
It's better to be happy than to be free. It is often better to be in chains than to be free. So some people are satisfied with chains.
Yeah, there's a certain safety in chains. There's absolutely a certain safety in the idea that somebody will look out for you. I mean, there's that famous quote, I think, was it Franklin? Those who trade liberty for safety deserve neither, something like that. I totally butchered that. Don't worry about it. But yeah, there's a certain, you feel like you're in the fetal position and someone's just taking care of you and you don't have to worry about things. There's a certain sort of happiness in that. Something's being taken care of for you. There's definitely some kind of comfort in that, because freedom can be scary. Oh no, what am I going to do? I don't have food to eat. I got to figure something out. Oh no, I've got to make a friend. I've got to make connections. I've got to provide value to somebody in order to make a living. Oh no, there isn't just some daddy or mommy to give me a handout. Oh no, that's kind of scary, but it's also, it's also invigorating. It's what life is all about. It's truly living. You're not just some child that is looking for a handout because you need somebody to take care of you and wipe your diaties. You are an adult, live human being who is taking on the world, who is confident in their own abilities and their own mind to not only take care of yourself, but take care of others and provide value and I've run out of ideas. Okay, but you know what I'm saying. I'm sure but you probably have points of motion. I mean, do I agree with those quotes? No. I'll take freedom every time. But I know that the majority of people if we're going to be honest about this, so like 90-some% of the planet lean socialists, have some socialist ideas, some socialist leanings, even people who claim to be, like classic liberals or conservatives, they still believe in some sort of socialism. So the ones that don't are very, very radical, very few in number. And we're in the super minority, but, we're used to it. Individuals are the ultimate minority. So I want to hear your take on it, though, Daniel.
Well, I liked a lot about what you said, and I have a few things to jump off of. But I, too, strongly disagree with both of these quotes, and though many people may prefer it, and unfortunately, as they prefer it, they enslave themselves and the rest of us. Because when they desire these chains rather than being free, it's not just for themselves, it's for everyone. And they end up shooting themselves in the foot because it's the ones who aren't afraid of being free, or that's not the right way to say it. Like, I'm sure that those who are facing the how I'm going to do this, you have to almost overcome this fear and adversity to be able to create. But it's really just a small percentage of people who actually need to be entrepreneurial and take on that route of discovery and progress that everyone else benefits from. Being an entrepreneur isn't for everybody, and it doesn't take everybody to be one to get a better standard of living. But when the masses can enslave themselves and the minority, then they end up preventing the minority who would have gone out and done something productive, advanced things, created technology, done things that are going to improve their lives. They end up losing out overall, and it's very unfortunate.
For sure, yeah. Do you want to get into criticisms of this world yet, or do you want to talk about some other stuff first?
Well, I have one other point to make before we get further into the film, because I want to talk about Bradbury's angle on why he writes fantasy and science fiction. And according to him, Fahrenheit 451 is his only science fiction film or novel. Everything else is fantasy.
Okay.
And he draws a distinction between the impossible and the possible. Science fiction is possible, and later in life, he said Fahrenheit 451 basically became true. Everything else he writes is fantasy.
Right. No, that's a good distinction to make.
All right, so here's his quote. "The way to teach in this world is to pretend you're not teaching. Science fiction offers the chance to pretend to look the other way while teaching. Science fiction is also a great way to pretend you are writing about the future when in reality you are attacking the recent past and present. You can criticize communists, racists, fascists, and any other clear and present danger, and they can't imagine you are writing about them. I love that quote.
Yeah, it is a beautiful quote because everybody can find something in there to, in fiction to apply it to their own lives, but rarely do they find it as a form of self-criticism. So yeah, I can imagine some county reading this and going, yeah, look at those people burning books. It's just the worst. But then they don't see their own ideology being under attack. Because, people don't have a lot of good self-reflection skills. Not too many people do. But yeah, I love the idea of, I'm doing it myself, of using fiction as a way to teach and entertain at the same time. I mean, you don't want to pick up a book and just be lectured at. You want to be entertained. And if you can slip in the lesson and have the person not even realize it, then that's perfect. It's like a stealth attack.
Spoilers, everyone listening to the show. That's what we're trying to do right here.
It is.
We've been outed.
Well, sometimes we do it far more overtly than other times. But yeah, it's what you do. You gotta wrap that medicine in sugar, and it'll go down easier.
Yeah, when I was a kid and I had some illness or whatever, and I had to take antibiotics or other pills every now and again, and my grandfather would hide them in strawberries because I really liked strawberries. He called me the strawberry crook because I would go out in the yard and pick the strawberries that were ripe. So he'd hide these pills in there because I wasn't able to swallow them otherwise, and I'd always discover them and not be able to swallow them. But anyway, beside the point. Well, actually, to the point. Yeah, sometimes you got to sugarcoat it. Stick it in a strawberry.
That's right. Stick it in a strawberry. People will swallow it.
Phrasing. All right, so I also got a whole bunch of other Orwellian stuff in here. Like I wrote down a bunch of quotes. Happiness is truth, freedom is choice, self is strength. And they're doing this like school assembly where they're telling all the kids like, hey, by the time you're grown up, all these books are going to be gone. You won't even know what a book is. And they get the kids all hyped up and so excited. And it's total indoctrination, and it's scary. Super indoctrination. I mean, the kids, when they show up, they just show a pretend book. Everybody boos and hisses. And then when they light it on fire, everybody cheers. Because, that book is scary, but it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, I know Bradbury was using it as, a metaphor and whatnot. You can't be perfectly... No piece of fiction is perfect. He was just trying to illustrate a point. But, I mean, if you want to dissect it, these people are even stupider because, like I said before, they don't differentiate between ideas. So an idea is dangerous if it's spoken? Who knows? The movie doesn't address that. It's only when it's written down is it dangerous. But anyway... I want to address this one criticism that I don't think it's not a fair criticism because, like we said, this book is about, and the movie is about, trying to teach and it's trying to make a point. But for funsies, I like to dissect movies based on economics from time to time. And this movie, it made me wonder just how in the hell this society would compete in the world. Because this is like the United States, right? And it's in the future. And this country has no way to innovate. It reminded me very much of like Mao's China or Pol Pot's Cambodia, where they're essentially demonizing and eliminating any kind of intellectuals, anybody who knows anything about anything. At one point in the movie, they talk about these people, they're eels, people that read, and how they take your jobs and steal your tax money, and how they're just like this, drain on society or whatever. They're just demonized for being, intelligent. And this country would be North Korea. It would get out-competed. These countries, historically and as a necessity, have to control people's movement. So, you can't just like have open borders when you're one of these super totalitarian, crazy commie countries. So North Korea, you have to like risk your life to escape it because you just do. Because if everybody could just leave, it'd just be a big empty space. Yeah, no one's taking a raft of milk jugs from Florida to Cuba. It's the other way around.
Right, it's the other way around. But so to illustrate this point, to say that the countries that are horrifically oppressive in thought and in freedom, which is essentially the same thing, they just can't compete because you wouldn't be able to innovate. Now, you might be able to get along for a while in this technology you do have, but in most communist countries and other places like this that are super restrictive on ideas, you just fail. So currently, in the most recent figures for North Korea and South Korea, two essentially identical countries. And North Korea is about the same size as South Korea. Maybe South Korea is a little bit bigger, but not by much. Have essentially the same natural resources. But there's one thing that South Korea has that North Korea does not have, is vastly much more improved economic freedom. Vastly. They don't necessarily censor ideas horrifically, and you can have a business in South Korea. And South Korea produces cars, electronics, all sorts of things. And the 2013, South Korea had, and I know GDP is a house of cards, it's a made-up number built on more other made-up numbers, but still, they can't be that far off when you're comparing two different countries on the same bullshit metric. But South Korea has 36 times the GDP of North Korea. 36 times. The numbers were something like North Korea had like 33 billion and South Korea was like 1.2 trillion. It's not even close. Economic freedom is, so yeah, I mean, it would have to be a totalitarian country that super controls its people and super propagandizes its people like they do in the movie, but you wouldn't be able to have like a porous like Canadian border or a Mexican border, because people would just be like rats in a sinking ship. Because when you are super suddenly oppressed in your own country, people can leave. People can get up and move, and they will go to places where there are lands of opportunity. Once upon a time, the United States was a land of opportunity. It still is, relatively. But people came here in droves for the economic opportunity and the relative freedom that this land provided relative to their homelands. And that would occur in the future in a world like this. And it's not addressed in the book, in the movie, but I just thought it would be fun to point out for the show that, these places and these dystopian futures are possible, and they exist actually in places here, like in modern campus life. But, I don't think that these situations are tenable per se in the real world. But this movie does serve as an excellent, teaching point. It makes an excellent point, but it's not necessarily a realistic point. I'll finish my rant with there.
Yeah, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down, and essentially this is similar to the B movie where Jerry Seinfeld's character got what he wanted and it ended up being disaster. This movie, Fahrenheit 451, is similar to if the SJW types who are on the campuses trying to shout down speech and inhibit ideas get their way.
Yeah.
This is the continuation of that.
Yeah, and even as it's explicitly said in the movie, right? They said, they found such and such book offensive, so we burned it. Then the feminists found this book offensive. He actually says the word feminist. So I thought it seemed like this movie was throwing shade at the current, SJW / campus culture, which I truly did enjoy.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, the 9, they kept talking about that. Was that the black market internet they kept referring to?
Could be. I wasn't exactly sure. They threw a bunch of terms at you, and they didn't quite explain them all. I mean, you got the idea of what an eel was, but you didn't know exactly, I suppose. An eel was just any kind of, it was almost an allegory for also immigrants, I guess, because, it was like you're taking your jobs.
Yeah, they became the other, and I think it was anyone who was being punished, like they were getting sentenced, and their fingerprints were burned off, and they were given a certain number of years of having restricted travel and no identity. And my thoughts there were, that's ostracism, man. That's one of the most powerful deterrents there is. That's an amazing punishment, and it would be very similar to what one would conceive of in a pure libertarian society where people's reputations meant everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they didn't show people going to jail. They just talked about being essentially ostracized, being a non-person for a certain amount of time. And yeah, it'd be similar to being a persona non grata. Your reputation is mud here, so either you need to bail in order to survive because no one's going to work with you except on the in the scummy circles. You can only get a job in Congress or something, just real garbage people. Or, toe the line and be a good citizen. And we've talked about this in the past with the Sesame Credit thing and, in a free market, in a true voluntary society where, people aren't coerced or violently attacked. This would be one of the more marketable solutions for punishment in terms of, people that do things that are not appreciated. And yeah, like you said, it's a super powerful tool that, since we are social animals, we would react super, super strongly to that. I mean, what would you do? All of a sudden you couldn't shop at the local supermarket. All of a sudden you wouldn't be able to associate with certain people anymore. You wouldn't have certain friends. You'd be stuck in this kind of underground world that you may not particularly enjoy.
Yeah, and I think there's some level of that. I mean, it's like Yelp for the individual. And you already get that in some respects with like ratings on Airbnb as a guest or as a host. You can get rated. Also as an Uber driver or Uber passenger. So there's feedback based on your behavior, right?
Boo, Uber. Boo. I just read headlines. All I know is that Uber is evil. Sorry. All Uber drivers, all they do is all Uber drivers do is they kill people. That's all I know.
That's the latest one, yeah. But we're starting to see that kind of a thing spring forth in the market. So you get a reputation that precedes you, and people decide whether they want to pick you up in their car, or if they want to ride in your car, or if they want to rent you their place, or et cetera, and on down the line. And you're right, it's very it's a fine line between a voluntary, market, spontaneous produced method of that versus a top-down control method of that comes from like the Chinese government with Sesame Credit.
Right.
I actually saw a headline the other day that I want to say some number of millions of airline or train tickets have been denied in China based on the low ratings of Sesame Credit. Like millions of people have been prevented from travel as a result.
Wow. And I thought that they were just voluntarily doing it right now and that they were going to make it mandatory later. But have they already made it mandatory? I don't know.
Yeah, I'd have to read beyond the headlines, and that's one of Bradbury's other criticisms is everyone just reads headlines these days.
Well, to be fair, and in my defense, a lot of the articles are written by really dumb people, usually kind of like tardy lefty people, and it's just painful kind of to read a lot of times. I mean, some articles are fairly fair, but more and more it seems like tabloid journalism. So I usually just do sometimes read the headlines, but I just assume that the headline is some kind of spin propaganda thing or some kind of ridiculous take on the actual story. That's usually my default. Because who has the time? Who has the time to read all these articles? But I do take his point. It is important to be as informed as you can. But a lot of times there's also the danger of being overly informed. And I mean by that, you spend way too much time just being informed about whatever and kind of like not cleaning your room and, kind of letting your own stuff fall away. And really, when they're spending a lot of time worrying about stuff that you can't affect, you can kind of fall into that trap. And I think I did that a fair amount when I was back listening to a lot of like Alex Jones and stuff like that. You can really get into the trap of kind of like pessimism porn where you are just kind of worried about the next thing or that sort of thing, and then less about, getting your own house in order.
Right, and then everything in the news is a sign of something, right?
Sure. So
everything is a reason to be concerned and be worried, and that would fall you back into this wanting to seek safety.
Right.
Yeah. And, the point of the movie here is, in the novel, I believe, is that the people demanded that the world become like this. And I think that the moral is, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I would agree with that, for sure. The movie doesn't specifically make the argument that, the tyranny of the majority, but I think you can suss out that lesson from it. Because if, who else would it be but the majority that is clamoring for this? Now, currently today, I would say that the loony left has a disproportionate voice in America, but they are still outnumbered by rational people, or at least, fairly rational people. So I don't know if they're necessarily the biggest voting bloc, but they do have a lot of influence, and they are increasingly, taking up spots in the media, as this show has demonstrated with various themes in movies and TV, and all you have to do is go to a website, and chances are you're reading some lefty whine about something. And the problem is, like you just said, that these people tend to see government as a good thing and to beg and ask and plead the government, as we have noticed from, say, just most recently, just off the top of my head, like the David Hogg types, who have a bad thing happen, and they complain and whine the government to solve it for them. And all the government does, the only tool government has in its arsenal is a stick. All they can do is use violence to attack people. But they think that government is some sort of benevolent fairies that can wave a magic wand and make these bad, bang, bang, kill guns go away. And I'm sorry, all you can do is consolidate the weapons. You cannot eliminate them entirely unless it's, I don't even know, like if you got some sort of a super robot with a stick and he goes around and just beats people on the head with a gun and he's bulletproof, maybe. Who knows? But you know what I'm saying. In the real world, the people with the guns would fight back. So all you can do is consolidate them into smaller and smaller groups, and all you can do that is violently. There's a fun story where they have these gun buyback programs, and what you can do, and there's a guy that does this, is he goes and he makes the guns out of like old pipes and just like terrible, just like, for a couple of bucks, he'll go to a scrapyard and buy some like pipes and old rusted pieces of crap. And he'll, put it together in the shape of a gun. And I don't even think it has to work. Maybe you demonstrate it and make it show that it shoots something. Maybe so you make it that bare bones, like, yeah, it kind of shoots something. But, he'll make it for like $10, $15, and then he'll go to one of these gun buybacks and get it for like $100 or $200 or whatever they buy back for. That's just the beauty. That's just the beauty of the market, baby.
A nice callback, Robert. That was your question to me about the Communist Manifesto with Marx's book, being the ready customer of buying every copy and destroying it. That's exactly what they're doing here. And I'm sure the guy's taking that money and buying a real gun.
That's what I would do. Yeah, baby. So did you have any issues with, let's talk about, we got all kinds of interesting things we've mentioned, but let's just talk a little bit about, would you recommend this movie? Would you, because I think the movie, even though if it's not that great, I still think it has a great message, and I would recommend that everybody see it, although it does kind of follow along similar dystopian themes and similar, ideas of what Orwell was trying to say, and maybe Huxley, I don't know. I remember. It's been a while since I read Brave New World. But
it's where they learn to love their servitude.
Yeah, everybody's on, what is it, Soma? Everybody's taking in Brave New World, and everybody has the free love, and they're all having babies together or whatever, and then the babies are taken from them and grown in vats or whatever. It's a nice vision of society, but it's, Anyway, would you recommend this film, Daniel?
Well, that's a difficult question, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for the end of our discussion, even though we've already been going almost an hour. But I will say,
you can bring it.
Well, I will say that the film is not particularly good.
Okay, good. We agree on that.
Yeah, the film is kind of garbage, actually, and I feel bad saying that because the material and the concepts that are elicited are very rich, and there's plenty to talk about, and we've only scratched the surface here. And our show really isn't much more than an hour, so I don't want to. I almost don't want to leave it on the cutting room floor, but I also want to keep us short.
Well, let's bullet point quick. If you got some juicy bits, let's hit them hard, and we'll do them try and do them quick.
All right. So he talks about having the realization that the authors spend a lifetime creating, and it only takes them a moment to destroy it with very little effort. And so that's like this huge disparity in how much work goes into creating something versus destroying something. And even one of the women who was visited by the firemen and had this library of books in her house, she chose to die as a martyr with the books in an effort to shock people into realizing what's happening. And then they dubbed over her voice and made her say something rather innocuous, like calling the firemen cowards, something like that.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. The other one I wanted to ask you about was the whole idea of the people memorizing books, most important books, this small group of rebels. And they had this Rain Man type kid who had memorized 13,000 books and can recall them by page and line, and you can test him and everything. And that reminded me of some stories about Murray Rothbard. He could do similar things. He'd have notes in all the margins and everything like that. But one of the books that this small group of people, because he had 13,000. Everyone else in this small group had one book to memorize, and they were referred to by that name.
Mm-hmm.
One of the books that made the cut, The Little Red Book by Chairman Mao.
Was it? Huh. I guess I missed that part.
And I did see Marx getting burned as well as Bradbury during the fireman fires.
Nice. I saw Harry Potter get burned. That's a dangerous book, You don't want the kids going to Hogwarts.
But their whole concept of memorizing the books was this collective unconscious, this Jungian idea, and this was their whole crux of getting the knowledge out, dispersed into the world, was to inject it into an animal and then spread it via the animal kingdom. So it's a little bit far-fetched for me. I sort of understand a little bit of the Jungian concepts from my psychology degree, but the reason they memorized these books is because it wasn't connected to the internet. It's totally off-grid, so it can't be found, and it's reminded me of how old minstrels would go around singing stories to pass them down through the generations. And you can just imagine, it's like a decades or generations long game of telephone. So there'd be embellishment and alterations and fish stories.
Sure.
But
go ahead.
Well, and then I was going to take that to the next level of Bitcoin and blockchain memorization of your secret code. Like you could buy a bunch of Bitcoin, travel somewhere else, have no record of it anywhere written down or electronic, just memorize the code, and then you can redeem it wherever you go.
Indeed. Yeah, it just reminds me of mankind, like in our infancy, and then you grow into an adult, and then you grow into your elderliness, and it's essentially you regress back to your infancy. So for almost the entirety of human history, we were an oral history people. I mean, we didn't have writing for hundreds of thousands of years. So all we did was pass down oral histories. And, yeah, who knows? Like a game of telephone, I'm sure the stories grow in the telling. So what is exactly true? And then, yeah, for human beings to be under horrific oppression, to regress to that, it seems to be a normal thing that human beings would do. I mean, when the mafia were, under threat by the FBI, they would not write anything down. They would only speak in person. They would just, they would go talk on it like a public telephone because they knew that wasn't being bugged. But they essentially became like an oral people. So yeah, when you are under the microscope, you will do what you have to do to, fight back or to survive. And yeah, it seemed like a normal thing that people would do. So I didn't find it unbelievable in the slightest bit. It seemed like a totally natural thing. Yeah, if your books are being read and you have no other means by which to record them, keep them in your head. It's a fairly inefficient way. I mean, how are you going to disseminate 13,000 books out of your head at any given time or in any way, really? I mean, maybe you could transcribe them later, but then he dies at the end of the movie. So there goes 13,000 books.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, what was the whole point of their plan if, spoilers everyone, Montag, the Michael B. Jordan character, he affixes the transponder to the bird that they put this DNA, what is it called, the omnis, in there, inside of the bird.
Right.
And his mission for the Rebel Alliance, the Resistance, is to get the boy, the 13,000 book boy, and that bird to Canada. And then at the climax of the film, there's a hole that miraculously burns through the roof of the barn. And Montag sticks the transponder onto the bird and releases the bird, and voila, his mission is accomplished. Like, what? Did they not think of this mission or this solution prior to a fire and being attacked by the SWAT team firemen? It seemed really bizarre.
Really, ultimately, the only thing Michael Jordan does is he gets this little transponder from some locker at work. It sure seems like these. We had this issue with the Blade Runner movie. Like, these underground people were just waiting around for the protagonist to do one little thing for them. Why now? Why not before? What stopped you? What stopped you before? And why did you have to flip one of these? I mean, were they so under lock and key, so perfect? I mean, I've seen movies like Ocean's 11 where people will come up with the most elaborate schemes to rob a place. Could these people not, bandy, figure out how to rob this fireman place for a transponder? Or I'm sure there's probably far easier places to get a transponder. Could they not figure that out? You're right. This seems like a really ridiculous plot thing where these people are just complete moron idiots, and it takes this conversion of a guy to come along and save them because that's their genius plan, when all they could have probably done is, order one off the internet.
Off the 9, the Ocho.
Yeah. Why did they have to flip Michael Jordan to get a transponder? That makes no sense.
And initiate him by telling him to kill a fireman.
Yeah. Right, and he's just going to go do it, but without taking off the guy's hood. He's just going to start stabbing a guy because somebody told him to. Yeah, it was pretty ham-fisted. I don't know if these flaws exist in the original story or not, but this movie, it seemed like they kind of threw it together at the last. It just screamed of short production cycle, including the script, which is really, really strange, especially when you got a book to go off of, unless these flaws exist in the original book.
Well, in my reading of some of the information surrounding the novel and the story here, the film, that some of these things were changed at the end. Some of the liberties were taken. And so I think the releasing the bird is one of them. But I want to ask you, and we can close on this before we get into our final summary and review. How in the heck does Michael B. Jordan escaping the firemen and leading them on a chase and getting into the forbidden or the black hole, like the black zone, whatever they call it, where they can't pick up their position? How did the firemen all of a sudden know exactly where he's going to be and beat him there? That makes no sense to me.
Because the script said it. I don't know.
We don't know where he's going, and he's about to enter an area where we can't pick up where he is, but all of a sudden we're going to show up before him where he's going to go. It was anyway. Your final summary and review, Robert.
Listen, this is not a good movie. There are many, many flaws. And it kind of reminds me of like the Atlas Shrugged movies, which I have not seen, but I've also heard that they are just not, well produced, not a lot of money. These kind of projects just don't get the mainstream money, which is why you really need to hide the message in a more mainstream type project, in my opinion. I think you need to really sugarcoat this message more. This book is famous, but I think that this would be, if this was more of a mainstream story that really was more entertaining, and less just like kind of heavy-handed beating it over your head with the message, kind of like Ayn Rand does, it would be a more popular, famous thing. Now, I know Atlas Shrugged is huge. It's one of the best-selling books of all time, but don't tell me that it doesn't just beat you over the head with the message. And like this story also beats you over the head with the message. And I think they would both get more modern mainstream money and have bigger productions and better values and better success and more widespread appeal if you were to sugarcoat the message better. Now, I still think this message is important, of course, and I think everyone should see it, but it's not the best vehicle for it. Like, hey, you should see this. It's a great movie. No, it isn't. So you really can't do that. All you can do is really recommend the movie, like, hey, you should see this movie. It's not a great movie, but it's got a good message. Oh yeah, what's the message? Oh, censorship of ideas is real dumb and bad. Okay, well, you could just tell me that, and I probably agree with you. You don't need to watch a movie about it. But I got a soft spot in my heart for these kind of movies, so it kills me to give this movie a negative review. But I'm going to give it like a 4.5 in terms of a movie quality. But I still think it's an important film to see, especially if you're new to these kind of ideas. If you are well versed, if you're like our audience, you probably don't need to see this because what are you going to learn? But and unfortunately, it's not the best ambassador to disseminate this information. I wish it was better. I wish you could just put some kids in front of this movie and have them be entertained, and then have them be grow up to be a wary of this kind of stuff. But it isn't. So 4.5, Daniel.
All right. Well, I'll take your 4.5 and I'll raise it to 4.51. Nice. Ironically enough.
I should have made it a 4.51, shouldn't I have? Damn it. Well,
you can amend it.
No. I like that. I'll be a 4.5, you be 4.51.
All right. So, yeah, it's one of those movies that isn't very good, but it has plenty of discussion points, and we, again, only scratched the surface. I think that we could talk for 2 or 3 more hours about this stuff, especially based on the notes that I have here. But we don't have time for it now. So I will say that the production value, not super good. Michael Shannon, I kept seeing Zod from Man of Steel. Michael B. Jordan wouldn't, and not a whole lot going on there. But the concept is really good, and I'm sure that at some point in my lifetime I would like to read Fahrenheit 451, Bradbury's original novel, and experience that. Because this, I feel, is probably not doing it a justice as far as how good the story might have been. So for that, 4.51. And I too feel bad about that. I had a lot of high hopes for this. Seeing the trailers for this when we were watching Westworld, HBO would play a little trailer beforehand, and you'd see 30 seconds or a minute of this movie. They picked the 48 seconds, the best 48 seconds of this movie to show you.
The only good 48 seconds.
So, yeah, one of those unfortunate deals. So, Kneel Before Zod, 4.51. All right, so we're going to wind this down here. lastnighters.com/22 is the show notes and more. And we are going to do next, the 50th anniversary has come up of the original Planet of the Apes. But there are 9 Planet of the Apes films, and so I think we're going to do sort of just an overall Planet Planet of the Apes like franchise, like the property, and I use that word very loosely, as our next episode. So we're going to talk about, I think, focusing sort of on the 1968 original and the most recent war for the Planet of the Apes. I think that's what it's called, right? The most current one.
Yep, that is it.
So that'll be episode 23 of the show, so do check that out. And we might have a Boys Night Out related to that in the following weeks. So look forward for that, or to that. And,
yeah, baby.
Also check out the libertarianunion.com, and that's pretty much all we have to say. I mean, we've been going over an hour here, so thanks for sticking with us, and do give us those likes, subscribes, shares, etc. If you are on the anchor.fm, do send us a message. You can do that very easily. You can send a message up to a minute long and send us any comments or questions, and we will attempt to incorporate them into the show and answer them. And who knows what will happen? It might be exciting. So do try that out.
Absolutely. Yeah, we encourage audience feedback. That'd be fantastic. We really do love to get your feedback and respond to it. So if you're out there and you got a point you want to make, you got a question you want to ask, man, hit us up.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Last Nighters, lastnighters.com/22. Thank you very much, and good night from last night. And we're going to turn some more frogs gay, do a little bit of Kathleen Turner Overdrive after this. We're going to wind down the actual Anarchy show. I know we didn't do a whole lot of special content for you guys, but Robert, you want to throw any bones at our non-paying anarchist listeners before we get into the paid zone?
I don't know. I could rant on anything. What do you want to talk about?
You know, if you want to throw your 10-minute Avengers rant here, that might be some pretty primo shit.
If you have the means, I highly recommend it. So, well, okay, just if I go long, just yell at me or something. But so over the past weekend or so, I don't remember. I didn't actually go on a weekend. No, I did. I went on a Saturday. I went and saw 3 movies. I saw Solo, I saw Avengers: Infinity War, and I saw Deadpool 2. And there's stuff to talk about any of the 3 of the movies. So we could do an episode on any one of them if Daniel would actually get out of his house and go watch a movie. But I can't really fault him for that because I rarely do this. And the only reason I went is because I could shotgun all 3 of them at once. So I was like, okay, I'll make the entire trip and make it worthwhile. But anyway, so Avengers: Infinity War struck me as a great movie. Fantastic. Just the ultimate pinnacle of comic book type movies. And the protagonist, he's getting some buzz for actually being a fairly strong protagonist, which is unique of the Marvel films. Usually the villain is the weakest character. But in this movie, he's actually one of the stronger characters, and he's actually given a whole ton of screen time. And his motivations are made very clear, and he's given some emotional development and not necessarily any kind of character progression, but at least you understand his motivations, and it's kind of interesting to me, and hopefully to you listening to this, to hear the kind of the feedback, because a lot of the mainstream normie type review comic book people, because this is a change. The change in the comic books originally, Thanos wanted to kill off like everybody in the universe because he wanted to get the attention of death because he was in love with death. And these eternal beings in the Marvel universe actually exist and have personalities like death and eternity and all these cosmic beings. In this movie, I think they made the change for the stronger. Thanos wants to only kill off half the people, and he does so because he's a Malthusian. Thomas Malthus is very famous for declaring that the world is a finite place, and there's only so much resources to go around, so eventually people are just going to start dying. And, it's not going to be able to support all these populations, so people are just going to live in squalor and whatever, and it's going to get so overcrowded, and it's just going to be terrible, and so we just need to have population control and whatnot. And it's a really dumb idea, but it made for at least a pretty dang good villain. Now, unfortunately, Malthus has been debunked for hundreds of years. Like, I don't know, there are plenty of dumb people, as evidenced by a YouTube video I watched, that still think this is true. So it brings up a good discussion point. Malthus is wrong for many reasons. One of the YouTube video I watched brought up this idea of carrying capacity of the Earth. And the idea that you could even come up with a number. He put the number at 13 billion, something like that. And the idea that you could even come up with a number is painfully ridiculous. Because it takes into, first of all, it's going to take into account any number of wild assumptions. But the biggest wild assumption it takes into account is that human beings don't think, that human beings don't innovate, that human beings don't solve problems. Because all it can do is say that, well, based on current modern-day technology and current modern-day resources, this is the carrying capacity of the Earth, 13 billion. Well, if you had asked Malthus that question, it was probably something like 1 billion. And I don't know the exact number that he gives. I haven't read Malthus in a while. But that was before atomic energy. That was before oil was really in use. Before oil was in use, it was just some black goop that you would occasionally run into when you were digging a hole. Completely useless until technology made it a thing and made for industrialization and massively increased the carrying capacity of the Earth. And so who knows what else is the world and the people are going to do to create a better world, to create more resources. We don't know the next technological advancement that's going to allow for vast amounts of wealth. Now, it's also dumb in the movie for multiple reasons, but because Thanos is he's getting the Infinity Gauntlet, which has all these Infinity Stones, and it allows for him to do anything he thinks of. And this has been brought up before, but I'm going to reiterate it here. He could just imagine infinite resources, or he could imagine, he could just change the universe so that people don't require resources to live, or any number of solutions that don't involve murdering half the people in the universe. And at one point in the movie, he talks about, what a success of murdering Gamora's homeland was. Gamora is the green girl in the Guardians of the Galaxy. He's like, I went back there after having murdered half the people on the planet, and it's a paradise. Oh, people are so happy. Are they really? They aren't just like a little bit resentful that you slaughtered half the people on the planet? Not a little bit sad that, half their family is murdered? Oh, paradise. Man, I'd so much rather have this sandwich than, my loved ones alive, because I couldn't think of another way to get a sandwich. But I can just magically produce, these beloved family members. And nobody calls them out on it in the movie. He's talking to, like, Tony Stark and Doctor Strange, like these genius people. Doctor Strange is this genius surgeon / genius mystic guy. And Tony Stark is this genius, inventor, scientist guy. And they're not aware of Malthus or his ideas. They're not aware of the arguments against them that totally debunk them. I mean, the idea that human beings destroy more than they create is completely ridiculous. Because if that was true, there wouldn't be anything here. There wouldn't be any stuff around. But human beings create more than they destroy. Human beings are net producers and gross producers. So you benefit from there being more people around. You wouldn't want half the people on the planet to get slaughtered. Like when the Black Death went through and mowed through Europe, you get suddenly reduced property value. Sure, there are less people. Sure, you get more employment. Yeah, there's, wages are going to increase because there's less competition for labor. Sure, rents are going to go down. Great. But what you don't get, you don't see. It's the seen versus unseen. You don't get all the innovation that those people would have provided. You don't get the production that people would have provided. Like I just said, they're net producers and they're gross producers. You wouldn't get the production from those people that died. The half of the planet that he wipes out could have been the Einsteins and the Teslas and the Newtons and the Fords and the, you name it, the Jobses and the Gateses of the world. You don't know that you're losing out on all these things that would have improved your life. All you know is that now you don't have a loved one. Now you've got to do more work to survive because you don't have all these services that you used to use. You got to pay more for certain services because there's less competition, because there's a greater demand for labor, so labor costs go up. It's a massive economic loss when there's a whole big die-off of people. When anybody dies, you lose their economic benefit. You lose anything that they would have ever created or ever produced. So these people that are like these environmentalists that think that, there's too many people in the world, probably most of the people are like, they live in like crowded cities, and they're like, wow, geez, there's just so many people here. There's just too many people on this planet. I just can't get to the store and back in less than an hour. It's terrible. Well, what they don't know, or they don't realize, is that a lot of those people live in those cities because they are artificially incentivized to do so. So oftentimes through government, but, oftentimes, through things like rent control and other, public transit systems. And there are numerous reasons that people want to live in those kind of places for the perks, the free perks that would not necessarily be there, or they would take different forms in a free private property-based society. But anyway, so that's basically my rant. I think I covered most of the things I wanted to say. It's a good movie, though. Check it out. One of the best Marvel movies ever made. It doesn't hold your hand, so if you haven't watched any of the other Marvel movies, you might not know who these characters are and what they're doing and whatnots, but they're some of the damn coolest scenes. Had a real good time. High recommendation from me. But go in knowing that Thanos' ideas are they're real dumb, and it would have been better for I appreciated the change to the Malthusian argument. If only the normies, they'll talk about it and go, well, he's a psychopath. He wants to kill everybody. Good. I'm glad you see that he's a bad guy because he wants to kill people. Thank you. At least you're not one of these crazy people who goes, well, he's got a point now, doesn't he? We should really just start killing everybody off. I mean, to those people, I say, well, start with yourself. Prove that you're a real true believer. I mean, there was a guy who set himself on fire in Central Park not too long ago. I think a couple months ago. He was a true believer, environmentalist type guy. At least he lived his ideology. I'll give him that much. So, Daniel, if you're still there, I think I'm finished with my rant.
All right. Well, super good stuff. That probably should be behind the paywall, but we'll leave it in for our anarchist friends. And I will mention that if Malthus was right, per your point being made here, then the firemen would have had nothing to destroy in Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah. But that's the kind of genius, awesome content you can get behind the paywall, just so you know, everybody.
That's right. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do the Kathleen Turnover Drive tonight because I'm about ready to get into my Rothbard Roundtable Nerd Group. It's a weekly economics discussion I have with a group of friends. We listen to a lecture and do some readings. It's usually like a Rothbard or Mises or Hoppe or Tom Woods or something like that, and then we do a discussion. So that's a really good time, and I'm about ready to get into that. So let's say goodnight for our Actual Anarchy audience. This is episode, I believe, 79 of the show, actualanarchy.com/79 for the show notes and more. We do appreciate you guys joining us, and we will be back with Planet of the Apes next week, and it will be just kind of an overall, what do they call that, eponymous? Or is that like a self-named? We're just going to talk about the concept of the Planet of the Apes and focusing on the first and the most recent film.
Hey, at least he's a libertarian type. Get your hands off me, you damn dirty ape! It'll be good. Come back for that.
All right. Well, thank you guys, and peace out. Maximum freedom.
I love you all. The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.